In God of War 4, Freya was at first presented as a character wielding an unfamiliar kind of power in the God of War series. Rather than power based on strength or prowess in combat, her power was moral, ethical. She possessed a sort of sympathetic magic to heal and to protect. For Kratos and Atreus, she represented a possible future, a different kind of god they could become. Different than Zeus or Athena, different than Odin or Thor, a better kind of god. However, there was a hidden darkness within Freya, one which she kept well concealed. Freya had lost almost everything. She had lost her home, her family, and her freedom. She focused all of her hopes on her estranged son Baldur. Baldur had come to hate her for casting an extremely limiting protection spell on his body, for controlling his life. But Freya still loved her son, was willing to die for him. And when she watched Kratos kill her son, even though it was to save her life, that previously hidden inner darkness consumed her. This is where her character stands at the start of God of War Ragnarok. Her hatred and anger have completely possessed her. In Ragnarok, Freya follows one of the most dramatic arcs of any character in the series. She begins in the abyss, broken, her only motivation to punish those who have wronged her. She ends the game by offering mercy to Odin, the one who wronged her more than any other, and by becoming a close partner to Kratos, the man who killed her son. I don't think players always realize how crazy her narrative arc in this game really is. By the end, her character has totally transformed. So let's watch a little of it. Freya appears in the first 5 minutes of the game. I don't want to watch the whole appearance, only a little bit, because there's this tiny interaction she has with Atreus that I think is very important. So here it is.
Oh no! Freya, we're not your enemy! Freya, what? Please don't make me do this!
Firstly, that other kind of power Freya wielded in the previous game, that moral, ethical power, that sympathetic magic of healing and protection, all of that is gone. It has vanished from her character. By the start of Ragnarok, that side of her character is lost. In this first scene, she's portrayed a lot like a lot of other gods in the series. Angry, violent, powerful. And that power is based on her physical and magical strength, on the ability to inflict violence, to force her will upon others. Except there's still a huge difference between her and all of the worst gods we've seen in the series, and you can see it in that tiny interaction between her and Atreus. While she and Kratos are fighting, Atreus draws his bow, aims it, and says, "Please don't make me do this." And she pauses. It only lasts half a second, but for that half second, she does stop fighting. She is being offered mercy, and she recognizes it. There is someone here she doesn't want to hurt. She does not want to hurt Atreus. She doesn't want him caught up in her explosion of violence. Compare this to Kratos in God of War 3. There are a lot of comparisons to make between Freya at the start of Ragnarok and Kratos throughout God of War 3. They are both characters who have hit rock bottom, who have been tricked and betrayed again and again, who have lost everything, and now live only to punish those who have wronged them. They don't want anything for themselves, they don't want peace, they don't even really care about justice, they just want revenge. But Kratos slaughtered everyone in his path, anyone in the vicinity of his rampage. In his quest to destroy Zeus, he didn't care who else he hurt. I don't think the Kratos of God of War 3 would have stopped fighting here just because Atreus pulled the bow on him, not even for half a second. But Freya does. Freya is different. Freya does have an inner goodness. Even now, at her lowest moment, she is not willing to hurt an innocent. And I know I'm making a big deal out of what is literally like 5 milliseconds of a cutscene. But I really do think that it demonstrates that Freya, even at her worst, is still better than the worst characters we've encountered in this series. Later in the story, on a very misguided attempt to offer Freya peace and partnership, Atreus goes by himself to talk with Freya. I don't want to watch this entire scene because it's a bit long and kind of exposition heavy, but there are 2 chunks of it I do want to watch, and we'll talk about them afterwards.
Freya!
You should have stayed with Sindri.
Wait! Stop!
Your father. Where is he?
Not here!
He sent you?
No! He doesn't know!
You shouldn't have come. He took my son What makes you think I won't do the same?
You're better than this.
You would stake your life on it? What do you know of me?
I know you haven't killed me yet, but we found here. Maybe if you spoke to him.
Tyr's alive?
Yeah. We broke him out of Svartalfheim.
Impossible. The 9 realms are closed to all.
No. We opened up the way. We just don't know where to go next. But if we all band together...
Enough. Enough! Leave this place. Go and do not return. Go before I change my mind. Do not expect the same mercy for your father.
Okay, so Freya is really scary here. She is legitimately terrifying. But even if she's tempted by it, she's still not willing to hurt Atreus. Atreus didn't kill her son. He isn't fighting her, but is instead putting his life in her hands, trusting her. When she picks up that mistletoe arrowhead, the one that killed her son, which Atreus wears as some kind of memento to his first real victory, she is confronted by Atreus' involvement in her son's death. If there was ever a time when she was going to fly into a wild, violent rage and kill Atreus, it would be here. But she doesn't. She calms down. They talk. This is further evidence that Freya is different, that inner goodness is still within her. Her character has sort of reversed itself in this game. In God of War 4, she was a peaceful character with a hidden inner darkness that we only saw glimpses of. In Ragnarok, she has become a violent character with a hidden inner goodness that likewise we only see glimpses of, but that is very much still present. Her potential redemption is there for anyone to see. Now for the second part of this clip. Earlier, I described Freya as a character who had lost everything, her home, her family, but she's really lost 2 homes, 2 families. She of course lost Vanaheim, the home of her birth, but she's been exiled from Asgard too. We'll discuss it more later, but Asgard was a second home to her. She lost her birth family when she married Odin, but now she's lost her second family too. Her marriage with Odin has long collapsed. Balder, her only son, hated her, and then was killed right in front of her. She had to bury his body herself, alone. By the start of Ragnarok, she has nothing left. Just like Kratos had nothing left at the start of God of War 3, and so threw himself into his violent quest for revenge, because that hatred and sense of having been wronged was all that he had. Freya does the same thing in Ragnarok. Until, in this conversation with Atreus, she suddenly learns that she may be able to regain her home. She may not have lost everything. Look at her reaction when she hears that travel between realms has been opened, how she immediately ends their conversation. If she can travel between realms, then she can go back to Vanaheim. She can free herself of Odin's curse. She can be free again. I've mentioned that Freya's quest for vengeance really depends on her having lost everything. She devotes her entire being to the quest to kill Kratos because she has nothing else left. But if she can go home, if she can regain her home, maybe even regain her family, that's not true anymore. In this scene, Freya is suddenly learning that her future life could be something more than hatred and violence and loss and bitterness. She could get her life back, or more accurately, since her old life is definitely gone forever, she could build a new life. The possibility of recovery, however slight, has been opened by the information Atreus provides. She doesn't give up on revenge just yet. Kratos still killed her son. She can spare Atreus, but in her eyes, Kratos still deserves death, which leads us to the next scene. Freya battles Kratos in full Valkyrie gear, wielding full Valkyrie powers. I haven't discussed it much in either of these videos, but Freya was the leader of the Valkyries, servants of Odin, a group of winged warrior women who guide the worthy dead to the halls of Valhalla to await the battle of Ragnarok. At one time, this was Freya's life. This was her identity. She had a central role in the mythos of Midgard and Asgard. She had companions. She had sisters in arms. The Freya we see in this battle is a very different character than either that common people peaceful witch of the woods we saw in God of War 4, or that desperate broken revenger we saw at the start of Ragnarok. This Freya is controlled, determined, and focused. Look how different her movements are here compared to that first scene. In that first scene, she was flying all over the place, knocking over trees, in a rampage wielding wanton destruction. Look how much more control she has over her body and her emotions now. And I think this new control is a direct result of her earlier conversation with Atreus, to discovering she may not have lost everything. In this battle, you can already see her restoring parts of her old self, regaining her composure. Now, let's watch how this battle ends, because I think it's one of the most important scenes in the game, and one of the most important for her character.
Freya.
Every agony, every violation imaginable.
Atreus! You do not want this! Control your mind! Control it! She was our friend. Atreus. Atreus. Are you harmed?
Maybe. For the moment. You're of more use to me. Alive.
In that moment of surprise when he realizes who she is, Freya is able to overcome Kratos. Revenge is in her grasp, and then Atreus transforms into a freaking rampaging bear, which surely must be something of a shock for her, but then Kratos leaps in front of her, leaps into the path of the rampaging bear to save her. The man she was just about to kill is fighting for her, is trying to save her life. Video game animations have come so far. It's honestly incredible. I think you can actually see the complicated series of emotions that Freya feels on her character's face, in her eyes, in her expressions. It's amazing, both in performance and technology. Think about that complicated series of emotions Freya must be feeling here. First, there is simply the adrenaline, the effects of battle, the sort of natural high that comes from fighting and competition. Then there's the shock at being defended by a man she just tried to kill, perhaps gratitude mixed with resentment that he would defend her at all, that he would jump in her path, that he still refuses to fight her even now. There must be regret, regretting everything that she's lost, regretting that her relationship with a man who still calls her friend has deteriorated to this state, regret that she almost took a boy's father away from him, frustration as she realizes that Kratos is a moral person, he is not the monster she's convinced herself he must be, he defends her, he calls her friend, frustration as she realizes he doesn't truly deserve death, that she will never have her revenge, because her revenge wouldn't be right. There is still that rage and fury within her too, and now seeing him interact with his own son, seeing that he still has what she doesn't, that he still has what he took from her, a relationship with his living son. Every single one of these emotions is roiling within her at the same time, and I think you can see every single one on her face. You can hear her frustration and conflicting emotions in that scream at the end, when she finally chooses to spare Kratos. It's tremendous writing and character development. Freya's arc up to this point is something worth studying from a writing perspective, to understand how the writers were able to craft a character that feels this genuine and this dynamic. Next, Freya returns to Vanaheim, her home, probably for the first time since her marriage to Odin, centuries ago. It's been so long since her last visit that she is essentially as much of a stranger in this place as Kratos is. Vanaheim appears apocalyptic. Its population has vanished. Every settlement is abandoned and in ruins. Freya sees firsthand the totality and brutality of Odin's betrayal. She married him, her greatest enemy, for the sake of peace between their peoples. She abandoned her home to save her home, and Odin destroyed that home anyway, left it a ruined and wasted place. Freya knew that Odin had resumed the war against Vanaheim, but I don't think she had any idea of the true scale of the destruction. Imagine the hatred she must feel for Odin at seeing her home in this state. Here we also learn that many of the people she left behind in Vanaheim resented her leaving, including her brother Freyr. Some of the people of Vanaheim called her a traitor. She led them, and then she left them, and then their world was destroyed. From their perspective, how could they not resent her? This adds a new wrinkle to Freya's loss. We knew she lost her family and home, but here we learn that she lost her people's respect and trust as well, something even harder to regain than the physical home itself. There's a brief meeting here between her and her brother Freyr, who she also hasn't seen in centuries, but I'm gonna pass right over it, because there's a more interesting scene between them later on. Her and Freyr's relationship is strained. It seems that he deeply resented her decision to marry Odin and go to Asgard, felt that she was betraying him. Harsh things were said between them at the wedding, and that was the last they ever saw of each other until now. Both Brok and Kratos offer her advice regarding repairing her relationship with her brother, which she rejects, because when she first arrives in Vanaheim, she is totally focused on breaking Odin's curse. Her brother is entirely secondary to this goal. In Vanaheim, Kratos and Freya spend a lot of time alone together, while journeying towards the source of Odin's curse. I usually focus these essays on the cutscenes of the games, because they're cinematic and exciting and very narratively dense, but so much of the story of these games is told through the dialogue between characters while you're playing the game, while fighting and exploring. And this section of Ragnarok is a prime example of that. Much of the healing in their relationship occurs in the dialogue throughout this section of gameplay, where Freya and Kratos discuss their pasts, their differing perspectives, their future, their children. Something I was struck by here was how little Freya actually knows about Kratos. They've only really had like 5 conversations total up to this point. Kratos knows a lot about Freya's backstory through Mimir's stories, but Freya knows very little about Kratos' background. She is at least broadly aware of his destruction of the Greek pantheon, but she doesn't know anything about his harsh Spartan warrior upbringing, about the killing of his wife and daughter, his bloody quest for revenge, about his later relationship with Laufey. Something else I was struck by was how similar Kratos and Freya's stories are. These are both characters who have been lied to, manipulated by, betrayed by, hurt by a pantheon of selfish and power-obsessed gods. They are both warriors who once laid down their arms in a search for peace. These are both characters who have lost their homes, their families, who have battled prophecy, who have lost themselves to quest for revenge, lost themselves to their own inner darkness. They both lost their children. They have a lot in common, and I think they finally both recognize that similarity in each other here. Kratos and Freya will end this game as close partners, and I think a lot of the reason for that is their similarities. They can understand each other's struggles because they have both lived them. Now that Freya has ended her quest for revenge, at least against Kratos, she is able to talk. I think this part of the story demonstrates the importance of talking, of diplomacy and empathy, of trying to understand each other, especially people we perceive as our enemies. Imagine if Odin were capable of doing this, of just talking without ulterior motives, diplomacy without manipulation. The things he wants, knowledge, understanding the mysteries of his world, of his own existence, these are the things the giants in the Vanir could have helped him with, things they could have worked together towards. The tragedy of this and almost any other story of a tyrant is how unnecessary that tyranny is. But back to Freya. Freya and Kratos succeed in breaking Odin's curse, and I think what follows is the best cutscene in the entire game, so let's watch it.
Is it done?
It's over. It's really over.
And now the that you have what you seek.
I suppose this is the point where I forgive you, where I kill you.
Have you decided?
To be honest, I don't think I can do either. There's still a part of me that is so angry. And it'll always be. It'll always be angry. But no. You are not the one who needs to die. I do see that. Look. Everything that's happened between us.
No need to explain. Not to me. Not for that. I do not regret saving your life, and never will. But the choice between life and death should have been yours to make. I should not have robbed you of that choice.
Something I really admire about the writing here is that the writers resist giving us a clean resolution to this conflict. So many video games, even really good ones, have simple storylines in the sense that their stories conclude in some neat and very final way. But that's not how conflicts in real life end. Most conflicts in your life will not have any ending, any resolution at all. Most real life conflicts will just sort of meander or peter out or come and go in waves. Even if you talk it out, even if you forgive, come to some kind of understanding, most real life conflicts will still be messy. They won't have perfect endings, even if things work out. And that's what we get here in this scene. There is no neat and final conclusion to the conflict between Freya and Kratos. She can't just forgive him. That wouldn't be the end of it. No matter how much they work together, no matter how well they understand each other, there will always be that anger and resentment, because Kratos killed her son. He broke her son's neck right in front of her. I don't think anyone ever gets over the death of a child, especially a violent death. That Freya is able to work with Kratos at all speaks to that tremendous moral power, which we saw within her in God of War 4. I also think that Kratos' response speaks volumes to the growth his character has undergone in these games. He understands the emotional conflict within Freya very well. He understands why she can't forgive him, why that anger will always be there. He speaks honestly and truly with her, treats her with respect as an equal. This analysis isn't focused on Kratos, so I'm not going to linger on him, but it must be noted that because of the growth he has gone through, he's able to inspire similar growth in other characters, and in these scenes he has been inspiring Freya. The next big scene is her reconciliation with her brother Freyr. Before I say anything about this scene at all, I want to watch it, and I want to ask a sort of writerly question. As you watch this next scene, does it seem like it has the same emotional weight as the previous scene between Freya and Kratos? Does it hit as hard emotionally as the previous scene?
We lost everything to that maniac you called husband. The man's family set me on fire. How did you expect me to react?
Like my brother! Like the boy that used to have my back no matter what!
and who I always supported no matter how selfish his choices. I expected you to come and find me. That no matter how hurt or angry, you wouldn't abandon me when I needed you the most.
Freya, please. I thought you were dead. I've had to live lifetimes with those last awful words I said to you. Have any idea what that's like? Knowing that your own selfishness hurt the person that you cared about the most. Abandon you. Oh, Freya. I mourned you. Oh, I've missed you so much.
And are you, Ingvi? But I won't bind myself to another realm when I finally have my freedom. I'll send help, though. And I will come back. I promise.
This hasn't been your home for a long time, has it? Do what you gotta do.
Okay, so my question was, does this scene have the same emotional weight as the previous one? For me, it does not at all. The writing here is just as good as before. It has the same honesty, the same genuineness, the same raw quality to the emotions that made the previous scene hit so hard. And it's tremendously well acted. Both of these voice actors are completely nailing the scene. But even though it's just as well written, just as well acted, good in all the ways that the previous scene was good, I still don't think it hits nearly as hard as the previous scene. The problem is that I don't know Freya. As a member of the audience, I haven't spent much time with Freya. I haven't seen this conflict develop, seen it hurt these characters. That scene between Kratos and Freya is a payoff of hours and hours of storytelling. 2 entire games worth of story and conflict, of getting to know both of those characters very intimately, to care about them, to want to see them do better for each other. The scene between Freya and Freyr does not have that weight built up behind it. Those hours of spending time with these characters, the hours of getting to know them. This is only the second scene Freyr has ever appeared in. I find God of War Ragnarok's story to be a bit rushed in places, especially when compared to how tight God of War 4 was, and this is one of those places. If we just had more time with Freyr leading up to this moment. I do like him. He reminds me of Nathan Drake from the Uncharted series. He has this sarcastic, nonchalant, pretty boy action hero style. It almost feels like he should be the main character of his own game where he goes on some kind of swashbuckling adventure. But let's get back to the analysis of Freya's character. For Freya, these 2 scenes are huge. She has regained her freedom, her home, her family. She has reconciled with both Kratos and Freya. Her life has taken a dramatic and sudden turn for the better. A little while ago, it seemed as if she had given up on living. She might as well have come back from the dead in these 2 scenes. Things aren't perfect, of course, which you can see in the dialogue here. I was surprised that Freya didn't agree to stay in Vanaheim to rebuild her home, to lead the Vanir. I thought that's something she would have wanted to do, and maybe an emotionally healthier Freya would have. Freya hasn't actually given up on her obsession with revenge yet. She's simply transferred the target from Kratos to Odin. She's much less desperate, much more in control of her emotions, but this obsession with revenge will remain her defining character trait until the end of the game. And as we'll soon see, this is to the detriment of those she cares about. Freya can't pursue Odin if she stays in Vanaheim. She doesn't want to rebuild yet, she still wants to destroy. Before we leave Vanaheim, we need to talk about this side quest. After you destroy Odin's curse, you can do the side quest in which Freya returns to the site of her and Odin's wedding, where she breaks various wedding trinkets to symbolically break her final ties to Odin. As she does this, she finds that breaking these things doesn't make her feel any better. It doesn't make her relationship with Odin feel any less over. It doesn't wash away the experiences she's had with him. So let's watch it.
There it is. My final tie to Asgard. We drove that sword into the pillar together. The sword was forged for the ceremony. The symbol of our union. Mona.
The stone refuses to let go.
Mona! The deepest wounds form the strongest bonds. Bastard said it as part of our vows. I hate it when he's right. Asgard holds a part of me I can't sever. I bond to my son. To the Valkyries. That damn realm isn't just Odin's. It belongs to me, too.
I'm surprised they hid this scene behind an optional side quest, because it feels really essential to her character development. I spoke earlier about how Freya has lost 2 homes, 2 families, and in this scene she realizes that for herself. Asgard was her home for a very long time. Odin and the rest of the Aesir were her family. I also spoke earlier about that lack of a clean resolution to Kratos and Freya's conflict. And here we see that kind of messiness and resolution again. Freya can't just neatly cut herself off from Odin and Asgard. They were together for too long. They've had too many experiences together. There really is no such thing as closure. Whatever experiences you've had with another person, good or bad, those experiences are always going to be a part of you. Here, Freya is learning that it's not a question of, how do I cleanse myself of these experiences? Instead, it's a question of, how do I go on living with these experiences? And we don't get any concise answer to that question, because it's something Freya is going to have to wrestle with for the rest of her life. Next, there's this section where the player takes control of Atreus. Atreus runs away from his father and he wanders into Freya's old home. In God of War 4, Freya lived underneath a giant tortoise, and when she embarked on her quest for revenge, she abandoned that giant tortoise, left it to die in the cold. Atreus only barely arrives in time to save its life. As someone who has pets, who really loves his pets, and who is revolted by the idea of someone abandoning their pet, I find this hard to forgive. Freya should not have abandoned this giant tortoise, this magical animal who relied on her. It's a really bad thing to do. It does demonstrate how drastic Freya's transformation has been, and also how much further she has left to go. In God of War 4, Freya was a character who cared. She was a caregiver. She took care of the animals in her woods, considered them her friends. The Freya of God of War 4 never would have allowed any harm to come to this tortoise. The Freya of Ragnarok is too obsessed with the revenge to care. Even after the reconciliation with both Kratos and Freya, when she seems so much closer to her old self again, so much healthier, she still never goes back to the tortoise, not even to check up on him. Even though she seems healthier on the outside, on the inside, she is still too obsessed with revenge to take care of the people who need her. It's the same reason why she didn't remain in Vanaheim to lead the Vanir. She is not her old self again. She is still consumed by her inner darkness. And I think you can see that in all of her dialogue going forward. From here on, Freya's role in the story is to be a voice for war. In every discussion between the characters, every council, she is the one arguing to take the fight to Odin as soon as possible, as aggressively as possible. This is a very different character than the one who appeared in God of War 4, who tried to stop the fighting between Kratos and Baldur. This is a Freya who wants a fight, who really doesn't want anything else. When Kratos briefly abandons the quest to destroy Odin, she abandons Kratos, returns to Vanaheim to fight the Aesir there. Eventually, she does get her way. Alongside Kratos, she battles and defeats Odin. Freya's reconciliation with Kratos and Freya occurs maybe a third of the way through the game. There's about 20 hours of story and gameplay that happen in between then and the end of the game, and Freya is present for all of it, but we are not going to watch a single scene from that very long section of the game. In my video about Thor, I discussed the difference between a character's actual presence and their narrative presence. Actual presence is how often a character is actually on screen. Narrative presence is how much a character's actions and choices drive the narrative forward. In God of War 4, Thor and Odin were characters with no actual presence in the story, because neither of them ever actually appeared in that game. But they both had huge narrative presence, because their choices and actions shaped the world Kratos and Atreus were journeying through. In God of War Ragnarok, following her reconciliation with Kratos, Freya becomes a character with a ton of actual presence, because she's around constantly. She appears in nearly every cutscene, but she has very little narrative presence. She's not driving the story forward. Kratos and Atreus and Odin are the ones really pushing the story towards its conclusion. And Thor and Heimdall and even Brock and Sindri are too, but Freya not so much. She functions as a partner to Kratos in the absence of Atreus. She serves as a guide during the quest for the Norns, and as already mentioned in every discussion of future plans, she is a voice for war. She is a major force in organizing the Battle of Ragnarok. But the question is, if Freya wasn't present, would those things have still happened? If Freya leaves the story after her reconciliation with Kratos, what major events of the plot would change? I do love and really admire her character, but I don't think the plot changes much without her from here on. And I don't think she has a lot of influence on the story. Without her, I think Odin still manipulates Atreus. I think Heimdall still eventually confronts Kratos, under different circumstances of course. I think Kratos still ultimately leads the battle for Ragnarok, again under different circumstances. This isn't a criticism of the writing. It's not a better or worse story depending on Freya's narrative presence. This is just an analysis of how the story is functioning and how her character is functioning within it. That's not to say that nothing important happens with her character during this time. When she meets the Norns and learns that it was her own nature, her own decisions, that led to the death of her son instead of just some unshakable prophecy, that's definitely very important for her character. Before that moment, she believed that the prophesied death of her son was absolute, that there was nothing she ever could have done to prevent it. From the Norns, she learns that if she had made different choices, her son might still be alive, which must be a hard thing for her to accept. It would be much easier to blame his death on fate instead of on herself, but she can't do that anymore. Then there's this scene where Odin stabs Brock and then Freya chooses to drop her sword so she can help Brock instead of pursue Odin. I think that's a really important moment for her character too. We've talked a lot about how obsessed Freya is with revenge, with killing Odin, but when the choice is right in front of her, when she has to choose between fighting Odin or helping someone in need, she chooses to help Brock. That inner goodness within her still wins out. This is evidence that Freya is still that healer and caregiver we met back in the previous game. I think when she chooses to recognize Kratos as the general who will lead them all in Ragnarok, that's another important moment for her character, particularly for her relationship with Kratos. This is Freya recognizing his competence, his judgment, his leadership abilities. She started this story hating him, trying to kill him, and now she's asking him to lead her in battle. Can you imagine a greater sign of respect? When she turns the tables on Odin in the final battle, has him at her mercy, that's a huge moment for her character too. It's her physically most powerful moment in either game. It's the first time in her entire life that she's had real power over Odin, someone who has dominated her life for a very long time. She has this bit where she declares, "You have no hold over me anymore," and then she spreads her wings and it looks really cool. Odin tries this desperate and pathetic last attempt at manipulating her by claiming he always loved her. She doesn't fall for it at all, and it's very satisfying to see how little power Odin's manipulations have on anyone anymore. He's experienced a total collapse in standing and he deserves it. The reason I'm kind of rushing through each of these moments is because, while well written and compelling and dramatic, I don't think any of them really tells us anything about Freya we didn't already know. We already knew Freya's choices, at least in part, shaped her son's fate, and she's spoken often enough about her regret that we know she knows it too. We know about Freya's enduring inner goodness. We know she respects Kratos. Just look at how she fights side by side with him for half the game. We know Odin is a pitiful little cock in comparison to her. So I'm fast forwarding to one of the last scenes in the game, to Odin's death, because here we do finally encounter something new in Freya's character, or at least so it seems at first. Kratos, Atreus, and Freya together defeat Odin. Atreus puts Odin's soul in this little marble, and Kratos offers that marble to Freya so she can finally have her revenge on her hated enemy. And let's see how she reacts.
What do we do with him?
I swore I would never rob from you the choice between life and death.
I have waited so long for this moment. And now that I'm here, I don't need this to make me whole.
We stopped his madness. That's all that matters.
A little bit ago, Freya very loudly declared that Odin had no hold on her anymore, but it wasn't true. She was still obsessed with exacting her revenge upon him then. Now, she's actually fulfilled that statement. If she's willing to give up this obsession to let Odin go, he really does have no hold on her anymore. She can finally move on. That inner goodness within Freya has finally won out. She's never going to be exactly that person we met back in God of War 4. Too much has happened to her. She's changed too much. But I do think from here on, she is going to pursue peace instead of destruction. This is exactly the growth in her character we all wanted to see from the very beginning of the game. I can't imagine that anyone liked seeing Freya broken, obsessed with violence and revenge. We want her to be whole and good again. But I have another writer's question, which is, when did this growth actually happen? When did this change in her character occur? Just in the previous scene, like 5 minutes ago, she still seemed very willing to kill Odin, but now, suddenly, she doesn't need to anymore? So what happened? What was the catalyst for this growth? The only explanation that makes sense to me is that, for all of her rage and all of her talk, Freya was never really willing to kill either Kratos or Odin. She did have opportunities to do so. She has both of them at her mercy at different points during the game. If she was a little quicker, she could have killed either of them, but she doesn't. I think, when the critical moment arrived, the goodness within Freya was always going to win out. At her core, she is merciful. She would have to overcome that deep, merciful part of herself to kill them. I doubt she even realizes this about herself. She probably thinks she really is willing to kill them, but her actions say otherwise. I should probably say something about Freyr's death here, but to be honest, I don't have much to say. Freyr sacrifices himself so everyone else can escape. I'm not sure why the writers chose to do this. It's sad, but also kind of random. I think it's meant to be some sort of fulfillment of an arc for his character, where he has gone from being a sarcastic, nonchalant guy to a true hero who is willing to sacrifice everything for the people he cares about. But it doesn't really land for me. Again, I think it's just a question of screen time. He just has not been on screen quite enough for me to have fallen in love with Freyr the same way that I've fallen in love with all these other characters. Like, Thor's death hit me really hard. If Freya had sacrificed herself, I would be devastated. Freyr's death doesn't have the same weight. Moving forward into the post-game content, and God of War Ragnarok does have some really substantial post-game content. The developers didn't just craft this massive dimension-hopping fantasy adventure, but also a ton of stuff to do even after the adventure has ended. And through all of this post-game content, you will be playing as Kratos and accompanied by Freya. In this epilogue, Kratos and Freya have become close partners, comrades in arms, fighting and adventuring side by side. It's a pretty dramatic and unexpected end considering where the story started. I actually find this partnership to be really interesting. It's very different than the Kratos and Atreus pairing. The power dynamics are completely different. With Atreus, Kratos was obviously the adult, the veteran, the father, while Atreus was the child. Kratos was the obvious leader, he was in charge. On the other hand, Kratos and Freya are equals. Freya has experienced just as much as Kratos. She's fought in as many battles, she is just as powerful. Kratos can't be the leader here. Freya is too intelligent and too independent for that. Unlike Atreus, she's not going to do whatever he says. This power dynamic, this equality in their partnership, doesn't really get explored much in the post-game. I'd really like to see this partnership continued in a future game, to see how they can work with each other and share decision-making. But I don't think that's likely to happen. The most logical place for Freya's story to go from here is back to Vanaheim, to rebuild, to become a leader again. And there's a lot of story left to tell there. Remember, Freya has lost the trust and respect of many of her people, and she will have to fight to regain that. Freya started this series as the Witch in the Woods, this mysterious and helpful guide character. From there, her story has taken some dramatic turns. She dropped into an abyss and climbed back out. She began this series as an example of a moral character, and that's where she ends too, as an example of mercy's ultimate triumph. However, Freya's story isn't really complete without Baldur's story, her son, and that's where I'd like to go next. Soon, I'd like to do a deep dive into Baldur's story in God of War 4 in the same way I've done for Freya, so look forward to that.